Why smart people are often envied in friendships. You didn't change. At least, not in the way they think you did. You still care. You still listen. You still send that check-in message late at night. But something has shifted. Not inside you, but around you. The warmth in their voice is gone. The replies are shorter. The silence after your success is louder. And you start to feel it not as betrayal, not even as distance, but as quiet resentment. The kind that never says it out loud, but always lingers in the air. You're not being punished for failure. You're being punished for growth. There's a strange thing that happens when you begin to understand yourself more deeply. When you stop complaining. When you outgrow the need to be validated all the time. You become less dependent, more peaceful, more focused. And somehow, that makes people uncomfortable. Not because you said anything, but because your stillness forces them to hear their own noise. Smart people don't need to prove they're smart. They don't flex. They don't correct you mid-sentence. They just listen, absorb, and move quietly. But in that quietness, others feel watched, judged, not by arrogance, but by reflection. Because your silence becomes a mirror, and people don't like what they see. That's why they pull away. Not out of hatred, but out of defense. They'll never say, "I'm jealous that you're evolving and I'm not." They'll say, "You've changed." They'll say, "You think you're better than us now. And all you've done is learn to be okay on your own." It's not that they want you to fail, but they liked you better when you needed them. When you were unsure, when you were still one of them. Now, your strength exposes their insecurities. Your direction reminds them that they're stuck. Your clarity becomes a quiet threat. So they stop inviting you. They stop showing up. They ghost you during your wins. And if they do say something, it's with a smirk, a passive comment, a sideways glance. Look at you now, leaving us behind. But you're not leaving anyone. You're just walking forward. And they chose not to come. If you've ever lost a friend not because you hurt them, but because you outgrew what kept you the same, this video is for you. We're not here to blame. We're here to understand why intelligence often activates envy in people we love most, and how to heal from the pain of being abandoned by those who once said, "I'll never leave." One of the greatest misunderstandings about intelligence is this. Truly smart people don't need to prove it. They don't need to win arguments. They don't need to dominate conversations. And they don't chase praise. Because for them, intelligence isn't a performance. It's a lens through which they observe the world quietly, precisely, and often alone. When you're truly intelligent, you don't feel the urge to correct every mistake someone makes. You don't speak just to fill silence. You don't interrupt just to shine. You listen more than you talk. You absorb more than you assert. And ironically, it's this humility, this refusal to show off that makes people misread you. Some think you're distant. Others think you're cold. But what they don't realize is that you're processing everything. Not judging. Not calculating how to win social points. Just noticing. And that noticing, that stillness, becomes unsettling to those who thrive on being seen. In most social circles, being loud is mistaken for being confident. Being animated is mistaken for being genuine. So when someone sits calmly, speaks rarely, and doesn't need to be the center of attention, they're viewed as strange, intimidating, or arrogant, even when they're none of those things. What happens next is subtle but powerful. People start projecting. They assume your silence means judgment. Your calmness means superiority. Your clarity means criticism. And suddenly, just by being grounded, you become the one who makes others feel unsteady. You didn't raise your voice. You didn't boast. You didn't insult anyone. You simply existed differently. And that difference becomes the problem. Smart people often find themselves excluded not because they're wrong, but because their presence disrupts the emotional balance of the group. They're too observant, too composed, too free from the need to compete. And in a world where friendships are often built on mutual insecurity, someone who doesn't play that game is seen as a threat. This is the first layer of hidden envy in friendships. It doesn't come with open conflict. It comes with subtle withdrawal, fewer texts, less eye contact, inside jokes that no longer include you. And you wonder what you did wrong. But the truth is, you didn't do anything. You just refused to perform. And your refusal broke the unspoken contract. In this part, we begin to understand that the quiet power of intelligence can unintentionally trigger the fears of others. Not because you intended to, but because your stillness reminded them of what they lack and what they're afraid to become. When growth feels like betrayal, you didn't leave them behind. You just outgrew the space where the friendship used to fit. But from their perspective, it feels like abandonment. It feels like you changed, like you're no longer you. But what they really mean is you're no longer them. Growth has a strange way of looking like betrayal to the people who refuse to grow. When you start saying no to the things you used to tolerate, when you stop participating in the same complaints, the same habits, the same routines, they don't see it as clarity. They see it as rejection. You used to spend hours gossiping with them. Now you don't. You used to stay out late, skip sleep, skip your values. Now you protect your peace. You read more. You question things. You take responsibility for your own healing. And because of that, the things that once bonded you start to fade. But here's the part no one tells you: most friendships aren't built on shared values. They're built on shared wounds. And when you begin to heal yours, the bond breaks. Because your transformation feels like judgment. Like you're silently declaring, I'm moving forward, and you're not. Even if that's not what you're saying. Smart people, especially those with emotional awareness, tend to evolve quietly. They don't announce their shift. They simply become more aligned, more authentic, less willing to perform for acceptance. But when the people around you are still stuck in cycles of self-sabotage, your quiet evolution becomes unbearable. And so, the distance grows. Not because you push them away, but because they no longer recognize you. Or worse, they recognize you too well. They see the version of themselves they wish they had the courage to become. And instead of being inspired, they feel attacked. That's the tragedy of outgrowing people. It's not loud. It's not obvious. It's subtle. It happens in the pauses between messages. In the tone of their voice when you talk about your new job. In the silence after you share something you're proud of. They don't clap anymore. They flinch. This is where envy is born, not in anger, but in ache. In the space between admiration and insecurity. And because they can't admit that your growth makes them uncomfortable, they call you fake, or distant, or self-absorbed. But you're not any of those things. You're just becoming real. And realness, in a world built on mutual coping, often looks like betrayal. So ask yourself, do I keep shrinking just to stay connected? Or do I keep growing, even if it means growing alone? Envy hides behind distance. Envy rarely walks through the front door. It doesn't announce itself. It doesn't throw tantrums. It slips in quietly, wearing the mask of busyness, distraction, or emotional fatigue. It says, sorry, I've been distant, just been swamped lately, when the truth is far more personal. They've been pulling away. Not because you did anything wrong, but because being near you hurts in ways they don't understand and can't admit. This is how envy works in close relationships. It's not loud. It doesn't always look like jealousy. It looks like disconnection, like silence where there used to be laughter, like brief replies to messages that used to start long conversations, like missed birthdays, skipped celebrations, or that strange pause before they say, I'm happy for you. You tell yourself not to overthink it. Maybe they're just tired. Maybe it's all in your head. But deep down, something feels off. The warmth is gone. And what's left behind isn't hate, it's emptiness. A polite emptiness that keeps just enough space to never have to say the words, I envy you. And you wish they would. because at least then it would be honest. But envy doesn't want to look small. It wants to stay noble. So instead of confronting its own insecurities, it blames yours. It paints your growth as arrogance, your clarity as distance, your ambition as ego. Not to hurt you, but to protect its pride. That's why it's so painful. Because you're being misunderstood, not by strangers, but by people who once loved you. People you laughed with, cried with, shared dreams with. They know your heart. But now they see it through a filter they never used before. A filter made of their own self-doubt. And the more you succeed, the more it warps. The brighter you shine, the more it burns. Not your light, but their sense of being left in the dark. So they withdraw. Not with a fight, but with silence. They stop asking questions. They stop showing up. And if you ask what's wrong, they say nothing when everything about their energy says something. Envy doesn't always hate you. Sometimes it grieves the version of you they used to understand, the version they felt equal to. And now, faced with your evolution, they don't know where they fit. This is how friendships fracture, not with explosions, but with quiet exits. And the hardest part? You're not even sure when it started. You just woke up one day and realized they weren't there anymore. Intelligence threatens emotional equality. Friendships thrive on balance, or at least the illusion of it. We like to feel on the same page as the people close to us, similar in struggle, equal in growth, safe in shared flaws. But when one person begins to rise emotionally, intellectually, or spiritually, that balance gets disrupted. And nothing disrupts it more quietly than intelligence. You didn't mean to create a gap. You didn't flaunt your insights or rub your clarity in anyone's face. You just saw things they didn't, asked questions they didn't consider, drew conclusions they weren't ready for. And that was enough to change the dynamic. Because intelligence doesn't just challenge ideas, it challenges comfort. And in many friendships, comfort is the glue. Take that away, and suddenly, people don't feel safe. They feel exposed. Most people don't realize how much their self-worth is tied to feeling useful, needed, important. But when your friend no longer needs advice, no longer spirals, no longer leans on them emotionally the way they used to, it doesn't feel like progress. It feels like abandonment. They don't say it out loud, but the question sits between you. If you don't need me to fix you, why am I still here? And it's heartbreaking because you never asked them to fix you. You just grew into a version of yourself that could hold your own weight. But instead of being celebrated, that independence gets misread as distance, coldness, superiority. Smart people, especially emotionally intelligent ones, often shrink themselves to preserve harmony. They downplay their insights. They pretend to struggle with things they've already figured out. They hold back, not to be dishonest, but to protect the equilibrium. Because they know every truth carries weight, and not everyone wants to carry it. But this shrinking comes at a cost. You begin to edit yourself in the places that were supposed to feel safe. You censor your growth, your excitement, your breakthroughs just to make sure no one feels left behind. And eventually, that weight becomes unbearable. Not because others rejected you, but because you started rejecting your own light. That's how intelligence quietly threatens emotional equality. It doesn't try to. It doesn't want to. But when your clarity makes someone else question their confusion, when your peace disrupts their chaos, when your healing reminds them of their wounds, they don't lean in. They step back. And the worst part? You feel guilty for being whole, for solving problems, for finding peace. As if your growth is a crime you need to apologize for. Smart people don't want to hurt anyone, but still get hurt. Smart people aren't trying to make anyone feel small. They're not walking into rooms thinking, let me outshine everyone here. In fact, they're often doing the opposite, playing themselves down, redirecting praise, staying quiet when they could speak. Because they know how sensitive people are to hierarchy, to comparison. They don't want to be a source of discomfort. They want to belong, just like everyone else. But the irony is cruel. The more they soften themselves to make others comfortable, the more they're misunderstood. Their silence is read as superiority. Their restraint mistaken for disinterest. Their calmness seen as coldness. And over time, it doesn't matter what their intentions are. Perception takes over. And perception doesn't always care about truth. You try to explain. You try to be warmer, more casual, more relatable. But it never quite lands. Because the problem was never your personality, it was their projection. When people are carrying wounds, they look for reasons to justify them. And if being around you makes them feel insecure, they'll find a story where you're the villain. Not because you are, but because it's easier than facing their own pain. And here's where the real hurt comes in. You don't get to defend yourself. You don't get to say, "That's not what I meant." You're just slowly excluded, quietly erased. They stop inviting you. Stop including you in the group chat. Stop sharing things they used to tell you first. And because you're emotionally intelligent, you pick up on all of it, but you say nothing. Because what would you even say? So you carry the ache in silence. The loss of people you never wanted to lose. The sting of being resented for things you never even said. The loneliness of being careful with your light only to be blamed for casting a shadow. Smart people don't try to hurt anyone, but they still get hurt. Not because they failed, but because they succeeded in places others feel stuck. And nothing triggers quiet resentment more than witnessing someone else's freedom when you still feel trapped. That's the paradox. The more you grow, the more you're punished not by enemies, but by friends. And the more compassion you show, the less people recognize you. Because they were never paying attention to your heart. They were only watching their reflection in your progress. And when the reflection got too painful, they turned away. Not because you changed into someone worse, but because you changed into someone they didn't know how to love anymore. The signs of envy smart people often miss. Envy doesn't always look like jealousy. It doesn't come with sharp words or dramatic confrontations. In fact, when it comes from people you love, it's almost always dressed in subtleties, glances, silences, shifts in tone that are easy to dismiss. That's why smart people often miss the signs. They're too focused on giving the benefit of the doubt, too willing to rationalize, to excuse, to say they're just going through something. And maybe they are. But that doesn't mean the envy isn't real. One of the first signs is sarcasm. Not the playful kind, but the disguised jabs. "Well, look at you, Mr. Perfect. Must be nice to have it all figured out." These comments are usually said with a laugh, but they land with a sting. They don't come from admiration. They come from a place of discomfort. A way to bring you down, just a little, so they can feel a bit taller. Another sign is absence during your moments of success. They were there for your struggles. They listened when you cried. But when you finally win, when you launch the project, get the promotion, find peace, they go silent. No text. No call. No congratulations. Not because they don't care, but because your success feels like their failure. And showing up would mean confronting that. Then there's the subtle withdrawal. Plans keep getting canceled. Conversations get shorter. You start feeling like you're always the one reaching out. And when you bring it up, they say, "You've just been so busy." But it's not your busyness they're reacting to. It's your evolution. There's also the shift in how they share. They stop opening up. Stop being vulnerable. Because somewhere along the line, they started seeing you not as a friend, but as a measuring stick. And when people feel compared, even if only in their own minds, they shut down. And finally, there's the hesitance in their eyes when you speak your truth. A flicker of something doubt, resistance, maybe even pain. It's not about what you said. It's about what your clarity reminds them they're not ready to face. Smart people miss these signs because they assume others see the world with the same emotional honesty they do. But not everyone does. And when someone feels threatened, they don't always fight. Sometimes they fade, quietly, elegantly, without ever admitting why. That's why it hurts so much. Because it's not just the loss of connection, it's the realization that you were never on the same emotional page to begin with. and you didn't see it until they closed the book. How smart people can respond to quiet envy. You can't control how others feel about your growth, but you can choose how you carry yourself through it. When smart people sense envy, their first instinct is usually to explain, to clarify, to smooth things over. They want to be understood. They want to fix the tension. But the truth is, envy isn't something you can reason with, because it's not about logic. It's about emotion. An emotion doesn't always want to be healed. Sometimes it just wants distance. So the first step is this: stop apologizing for being clear. Stop dimming your light just to make others feel less in the dark. You don't owe anyone an explanation for your insight, your discipline, your peace. Especially not when you earn them the hard way. That said, you also don't need to confront every friend who withdraws. Not every wound deserves a speech. Sometimes, the most powerful thing you can do is observe. Let their behavior speak louder than your interpretation. If someone pulls away when you start thriving, don't chase them. If they grow silent when you find clarity, don't fill the silence for them. You can love someone and still let them go. The second step is boundaries, not walls. Just clarity about what kind of energy you allow around you. If someone consistently makes you question your worth, second-guess your joy, or shrink your growth, that's not friendship. That's emotional erosion. And even if it's not intentional, it still takes a toll. The third step is solitude, not as punishment, but as restoration. You need space to remember that your evolution is not a burden, that your mind is not too much, that your insight is not a threat. Smart people often feel alone, not because they are unlovable, but because they're waiting to be loved without being asked to become less. And finally, build new bonds, not with people who flatter you, but with those who feel safe in the presence of truth. People who don't envy your clarity, but match it. People who aren't afraid of your light because they found their own. Because the answer to envy isn't silence. It's resonance. It's choosing to surround yourself with those who don't feel small when you rise but inspired. So if you've ever felt punished for your progress, remember, not everyone who walks with you is meant to walk the whole way. And sometimes, losing people is not a tragedy, it's a graduation. Growing alone without becoming bitter. There's a danger that comes with growth, not just the loneliness, not just the envy you may encounter, but the bitterness that can creep in after too many goodbyes. You start to question your heart. You wonder if maybe you did change for the worse. If maybe your truth is too much. If maybe it's easier to stop evolving altogether, just to keep the peace. But that's the trap. That's the cost of letting resentment speak louder than reflection, because the world needs your clarity, your voice, your presence, even if some people couldn't handle it. The goal is not to become untouchable. It's to remain open, even when it hurts. Even when you've been misunderstood. Even when they walked away without saying why. Bitterness is not strength. It's a scar that never learned how to heal. And smart people are especially prone to it because they notice everything, feel deeply, and carry the weight of insight most people don't even recognize. But don't let that turn into coldness. Don't let it close your heart. You can grow without becoming hard. You can walk alone without building walls. You can hold your truth with tenderness. And yes, you can outgrow people with grace. Because not every loss is a curse. Some are corrections. Some are invitations to return to yourself, more honest, more whole, more aligned than you've ever been. And when the day comes that someone new enters your life not threatened by your insight, but drawn to it, you'll realize it was never about being too much. It was about being in the wrong room. The people meant for you won't need you to shrink. They won't ask you to explain your light. They'll sit with you in your silence, honor your depth, and match your energy, not mimic it, but respect it. Until then, grow anyway. Keep learning. Keep healing. Keep evolving. Not to impress anyone. Not to prove your worth. But because that's who you are. If you've made it this far in the video, you already know, intelligence is not just about how you think. It's about how you carry your heart through a world that doesn't always understand it. So here's the truth, as clearly as I can say it: you are not too much. You're just surrounded by people who've never met enough.